संधान All Gujarat Integrated Classroom
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.
Hello everybody, welcome to Sandhan BIOSEC English lecture series. My name is Mubina Qureshi. I'm working as a teaching assistant in English communication at IIT RAM, that is to say Institute of Infrastructure Technology Research and Management. It is situated in Maninagar, Ahmedabad. Today's topic is a poem, that is The Professor by Nissim Ezekiel. Let us have a look at the PPT also. Let me begin with the very famous quotation, famous dialogue by Jean-Paul Sartre, which is my favorite one. And he says, to read a poem in January is as lovely as to go for a walk in June. Literally, when you talk about a poem, when you talk about reading a poem, it gives you a kind of pleasure, a kind of coziness, which ultimately gives you a soothing effect, rationally, emotionally, philosophically, psychologically, or somewhere that gives you humor also. The poem which we are going to learn today is The Professor by Nissim Ezekiel. The poem is written by Nissim Ezekiel. The writer, the poet, was born on 14th of December 1924 and just died in 2004, 9th of January 2004. Let us have a biographical sketch, brief biography of the poet. Nissim Ezekiel was an Indian Jewish poet, playwright, editor and art critic. He is known for his pioneering contribution in India's post-colonial literary writing in English. Let me just explain a bit about post-colonial literary writing in English. That is to say, the writing, especially literary writing in English after independence. And this writer, this poet, Nissim Ezekiel, can be tagged as one of the most important and one of the most important as well as pioneering contributor in writing verses, as he is very famous, and because of his works he got Sahitya Akademi Award in 1983 for poetry collection Latter Day Zams. Secondly, he got Padma Shri Award in 1988. He was born in Mumbai. His father, Moses Ezekiel, a professor of botany at Wilson College. Because of the background also, we can say that he had such a kind of knack at writing poems, and as his mother also was a principal of her own school, he belonged to Mumbai's Jewish community, especially known as the Bene Israel. He did his MA in English literature from Mumbai University in 1947. He studied philosophy at Birkbeck College, London, and he got married with Daisy Jacob in 1952. He became an assistant editor in 1953 in the Illustrated Weekly of India. That is again a very famous and important thing. He became a broadcaster on arts and literature for All India Radio, that is to say AIR. Professor Ezekiel was the head of the department of English in Mithibai College. That is again a very famous college of Mumbai, and he worked there from 1961 to 1972. He rendered his service as visiting professor at University of Leeds 1964 and University of Chicago in 1967. That is again a kind of important thing about his career. Let us have a look at the poetic collections. Ezekiel's poetic collections. There are few wonderful poems, collection of poems. First is Time to Change, 1952. 60 poems, 1953. The third, 1959. Itself, the title itself is the third collection. The Unfinished Man, 1960. The Exact Name, 1965. Snakeskin and Other Poems in 1974. Hymns in Darkness, 1976. Latter Day Psalms, 1982. And Collected Poems from 1952 to 88, which was published in 1989. We can see this much of poetic work he had done during his career, and that is why he was able to get awarded with Padma Shri and Sahitya Akademi Awards. We can have a glance at Ezekiel's few of the collections. That is to say, the Unfinished Man poems, then the Sahitya Akademi Award winner, Latter Day Psalms, and the third one, Nissim Ezekiel's collected poems. Now, the core part, that is to say, the poem to be studied today. The poem, the poem itself is very short one, very easy to go through, but the intended meaning, the exact idea, is something very different from what exactly it has been seen. Let me read it first. Remember me? I am Professor Sheth. Once I taught you geography. Now I am retired, though my health is good. My wife died some years back. By God's grace, all my children are well settled in life. One is sales manager. One is bank manager. Both have cars. Other also doing well, though not so well. Every family must have black sheep. Sarla and Tarla are married. Their husbands are very nice boys. You won't believe, but I have 11 grandchildren. How many issues you have? 3? That is good. These are days of family planning. I am not against. We have to change with times. Whole world is changing. In India also, we are keeping up. Our progress is progressing. Old values are going. New values are coming. Everything is happening with leaps and bounds. I am going out rarely now and then. Only this is price of old age. But my health is okay. Usual aches and pains. No diabetes, no blood pressure, no heart attack. This is because of sound habits in youth. How is your health keeping? Nicely. I am happy for that. This year I am 69 and hope to score a century. You were so thin, like stick. Now you are man of weight and consequence. That is good joke. if you are coming again this side by chance, visit please my humble residence also. I am living just on opposite house's backside. The poem by and large is really very simple to understand. We can easily read it, understand it without going for the dictionary meanings, or without fetching the dictionary, we can say, because none of the words is too difficult to understand. Rather, it is too easy to understand, too easy to go with. So when we summarize the whole poem line by line, it is very easy, because the poem itself begins with a simple question. We can see, remember me. The question is from a retired geography professor to one of his former students. He is just asking that person, some former student just has met this professor, and he is just making him remember that he was his professor before few years, and he is just asking, do you remember me? Just like that, very casually. Then he describes his current position, his family, his health. He tells him that his wife has passed away few years back, and by God's will all his children are well settled in life. Now this is how actually he tries to convey what exactly his position, his current position is nowadays. To describe the social and financial condition, the retired professor says that both his sons own cars. Now this is again a kind of psychological factor, that to show somebody's social and financial condition, one has to add what he or she possesses. And exactly he is doing the same, that his sons, both of his sons are owning cars, and that is through this he is trying to establish a kind of superior position in society. And his third son, whom he considers as the black sheep of the family, is not worth discussing. As we know, as every family has somebody who is not that of a level or that of a status, and he just is pinning it out that every family is having at least one black sheep, and the third son he is having is just like that, a black sheep of the family, not doing much, not keeping wealth, and that is why he is feeling like he is the black sheep of the family, not doing much well, not doing exactly what the older ones are doing. So the third son, he is considering him as the black sheep of the family. Lines 12 to 21. The professor then talks about his daughters. The names are given Tarla and Sarla. Now again, it's a kind of rhythm, it's a kind of rhyming words to make the poem lucid, and he just gives us information regarding his daughters Tarla and Sarla. He feels happy about his daughters' happy married lives. Why? Because they both are married with very gentlemen kind of boys, and they both are doing well, they are happy, and very proudly this professor tells the student that he has 11 grandchildren. Now 11 grandchildren and his own children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. So it's like 5 himself he is having. He is having 5 children. Again he is proudly mentioning that he has 11 grandchildren also. Then the professor keeps on talking and talking, He talks about the changing times and the importance of change. Old values are being replaced by new values. He's just trying to make him engage in the conversation, though the listener, or we can say the student, is not replying. That fellow is not reciprocating. The professor himself only is talking to this student. Lines 22 to 35. The professor then describes his own health. He was just talking about the family, the 3 boys, then 2 girls. Now he is coming to the point where he is talking about his own health. And he says his health is okay. Now Nissim Ezekiel has used the term okay in the way we usually use it in routine day-to-day conversation. It doesn't look like very much versified, or we can say it doesn't look like poetic one. It looks very much casual. It looks very much routine kind of language to us. But he then mentions that he does have usual aches and pains. Though his health is okay, he has few aches and pains which is very usual at this age. Then proudly he indicates that he is not suffering from diabetes or blood pressure or any heart disease. That is again a kind of proud feeling to this professor, that he is not suffering from such kind of diseases. The professor feels proud to say that he is healthy because of the good habits that he has cultivated from his youth. Now he is giving the reason also why he is so fit, why he is not having diabetes or heart attack or any bigger very severe kind of diseases at this age. And he is giving the reason that good habits which he had cultivated in his youth. Definitely this can be the reason for his good health. Then he talks about the listener. He asks the listener the health of that person. Now he is asking. Till here the professor is talking, he is mentioning everything about himself only. He was not asking anything to this person, to the listener, to the student. Now he is turning to this fellow, this listener, this student, and is asking about the health. The professor finally reveals his age. He says that he is 69 and hopes to live for 100 years. This is again a kind of psychology or mentality of old age people in India, that they love to have 100 plus of age. He jokes with his student that he used to be like a stick earlier, but now he looks like a man of weight and consequence. He remembers that the student before few years was not this much healthy, and he was not having this much of weight, and that's why he is jokingly telling that student that he was looking like a stick, very thin one, but now being a man, being a very healthy one, he looks better with weight and consequence. Then in the last few lines, or 2 lines we can say, the professor asks him to pay a visit to his home if he ever comes near to his dwelling place. And these 2 lines, last 2 lines, are really wonderful. He says, if you are coming again this side by chance, visit please my humble residence also. I am living just on opposite house's backside. That is to say, he is just trying to adjust words. He is trying to use English language, though he is not good at. And the formation of sentences is showing something else. That is actually a fun. Now, as we are done with the summary part, as we are done with what exactly the poem is talking about, that is really very simple to understand. No, not a single word we could just had very difficult kind. So, as we are done with this part, let us discuss the other dimensions, the other things of the poem, The Professor. And when I tag it as a satirical poem, how and why it is a satirical poem? The question is that only. A satirical poem? How? As we know, a satire is a way of criticizing a person, an idea, or something where the poet uses humor to point out their faults and weaknesses. We just laugh out our faults, we just laugh out our weaknesses. And by criticizing a person or any idea or any system, we just try to say that it needs a betterment, it needs some refinement. Here also, the poem is also it can be called as a satirical poem. The professor makes fun of himself by the way he speaks or thinks. The way he is using language, the way he is talking, the way he is thinking is all about a kind of thing which he makes fun of himself. When we talk about a professor, the professor should be very proper in his subject or the medium he teaches. Whichever language he is using, he must be very proper in it. But here, the professor is caricatured because of his erroneous dialect. Now, let us understand the word caricature also. With the word, we must understand to caricature means to sketch somebody humorously, to sketch somebody or a class or a particular aspect in a very funny way. The professor's character here is a kind of caricature who is using English language not as the basic medium but as the second language. And the second language is not that much fluent. He is not that much fluent in that language, and that's why he is creating errors. Which kind of errors? And that is why it is a satirical poem where the poet Nissim Ezekiel is trying to prove the point. What exactly the trend is there in Indian English speaking public. Again, there is a question. A monologue. How? We discussed that it was a satirical poem, and then we are discussing that this poem is also a monologue. In the entire poem, the professor speaks in the first person singular voice. Nobody else is there to interrupt. No sentence is said or told or answered. The questions are there, the professor is asking questions, but there isn't any answer by somebody else than himself. He himself is getting the answer and responding. So the whole poem, the entire poem, the professor speaks in the first person singular voice, and the listener, the student, does not say a single word in reciprocation. There isn't any reciprocation, there isn't any communication between two persons. Just the professor, the character, Mr. Shah, Mr. Sheth, is handling the whole conversation, and he is going on with his own ideologies, with his own way of thinking, with his own experiences, with the questions, with the answers. He is responding, he is questioning, and he is showing his own ideas. So we can tag this poem as a monologue also. We know what exactly a monologue is. A single person, or we can say a dialogue, lengthy dialogue. This poem is very shorter one, not very lengthy. Again, it is a kind of dialogue between two actually, but a dialogue is spoken by this person only, the professor only, this Mr. Sheth only. And this Professor Sheth is the entire focus of the whole poem, and he is just talking and talking, and he is just engaging the whole poem with his own views and with his own ideas. Another thing that is very important, that is to say, mockery of Indian English. The language, Indian English language we are talking about. The poem is composed in Indian English, and the poet mocks Indians who finds prestigious to speak in English even when they are not so good in it, rather than in their mother tongue. It is a kind of mentality where Indian public feels good when they speak in English language rather than in their vernacular language or their mother tongue. They feel good, they feel prestigious, they just feel like they are superior than others. And here also this Professor Sheth, who is not good at or very fluent with the language, he still tries to convey the whole entire conversation in English language. And the language he is using is totally a kind of mockery of it. Let us have a look which kind of mockery is there. First and foremost, ditto translation of vernacular language into English makes it funny. When you use your language, any language, Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi, Kannada, any language, and when you translate it into English language and you use the ditto translation, then it becomes funny. The exact word may have different connotation, may have different meanings, may have different context when it is there in English language. But when we speak in our language, we have different connotations, we have different meanings. But what exactly we do, or Indians do, Indians make use of English language as a status symbol, and they just forget the basic ideas, the basic understanding of what exactly they are conveying. Few examples are here. In Hindi language, when we say गोलियां चल रही थी, and when somebody translates it into English language, there are possibilities of this kind of errors. Bullets were walking, or someone would say medicines were walking. Here, goliyan, bullets, medicines. You now can understand which kind of problem is occurring with this professor, which kind of thing is going on in his mind. He is translating his own dialect, his own language sentences into English language, and that's why he is committing mistakes. He is committing mistakes because of this kind of mentality, this kind of false practice. From the poem, we can have few examples also, like हमारी प्रगति हो रही है या हो रही थी. When the professor tries to say इंडिया में भारत में प्रगति हो रही है, he just said our progress was progressing. Now this is really funny. Such kind of sentence does not exist in English language. Other examples we can have with different connotation. He says old values are going, new values are coming. Another one, I am living just on opposite house's backside. These all sentences are really not in a proper structure. Other sentences are also there in the poem. Almost each and every simple sentence which is looking so simple has such kind of minute errors. And by thinking like this, Nissim Ezekiel wanted to mock the language, Indian English language. He is one of the very, very wonderful poet, very wonderful with the vocabulary, very wonderful with the ideas and knowledge of words. And when he is writing so simple poem, we as the readers must click with the hidden meaning, with the intended meaning. Why Nissim Ezekiel, such a grand poet, had written so simply, with so simple words. So these are the basic things that the professor who is not good at language, he is trying to become, he is using the language just to show that he is superior one, he knows something more than that student. Lastly, we can have few appraisals, we can have few writers' few scholars' views on Nissim Ezekiel's poetry as well as his style, the overall aspects, the overall writing. Indianness in Indian writing in English is the sum total of cultural patterns of Indian and the deep-seated ideas and ideals, especially political, economic, secular and spiritual, that constitute the mind of India. And Nissim Ezekiel has skillfully used most of the aspects of Indian life and cultures in his poetry. Now this is what exactly we got from the poem also. The ideals, political, economic, secular and spiritual. We the Indians live with these notions. We have ideas and ideals to show it off. And just because of that, the Indianness, the very core part of Indian people, the Indianness, and that remains always a focus of Nissim Ezekiel in most of his poems. That is why he is famous for with Indianness in his own writing in English. He tries to focus on the Indian mentality. Nissim Ezekiel has beautifully used the long history of Indianness as the socio-cultural identity, its different expressions and its rich variety in his poetry. When you read other poems also, you can have this special kind of treatment by Nissim Ezekiel, that he tries to capture the beautiful long history of Indianness as the socio-cultural identity. We are different with different expressions. We try to convey our messages, our ideas, our ideologies, and with this rich variety, Nissim Ezekiel beautifully puts everything with so simple manner, with so simple words, with so lucid way of expression. And that is why he becomes so famous among the readers. As Dr. Ratan Bhattacharya ji speaks and tells us that as a realistic poet, Ezekiel shows the desire to see better conditions of life in this country. Again, let us go back to what exactly we had discussed earlier under the title satirical poem. As it is a satirical, every satire has a specific notion, a specific function, and the function is to have a desire, to show the desire to see betterment, better conditions, a revolution, a reform of whatever it is being talked about. Here also, being a realistic poet, Ezekiel shows the desire to see better conditions of life in this country, in India. Vijay Kumar Das, he is also a scholar, and he has said that Nissim Ezekiel's name is almost synonymous with post-independence Indian English poetry. Just like when we say William Shakespeare is equal to Elizabethan poetry, here also we can say that Nissim Ezekiel is equal to post-independence Indian English poetry. It is he who has given a new direction and a name, as it were, to Indian English poetry. In him, not only scholarship merges into criticism, but all the three things, poetry, scholarship and criticism, act and interact upon one another. Again, he is not just a poet. He used to write poetry. He was a wonderful scholar and again a critic, art critic. So all the three aspects merge together: poetry, scholarship and criticism. All these three things act and interact upon one another. Nissim Ezekiel is acclaimed as the father of post-independence Indian English words. He is a trendsetter who started modernity in Indian English poetry. Again, this is a appraisal when the person, Nissim Ezekiel's, the critic is saying that Nissim Ezekiel is acclaimed as the father of post-independence Indian English words. Definitely, for sure, because he has contributed like a trendsetter who started modernity in Indian English poetry. And then the horde of contemporary Indian English poets follow the simple conversational style of Ezekiel. After Nissim Ezekiel, the Indian writers in English followed the style. They remained simple, they remained conversational, they remained what exactly Nissim Ezekiel had done, and so we can say that he is a trendsetter. Not only in the style but also in the selection of themes, one finds the influence of Ezekiel in the contemporary Indian English poets. Professor K.V. Dominic. Yes, of course. When we talk about the style, the easy, simple, conversational style, definitely the writers, the poets after Nissim Ezekiel had followed this style. They had followed Nissim Ezekiel's pattern. But again, theme-wise, if we look at the things, Nissim Ezekiel had influenced his contemporary Indian English poets with the themes also, like Indianness in English language, Indianness in poetry, then the agony, the depression which the upper class or the elite class feels, or what exactly they think for the betterment of the country, the betterment of the mentality, the makeup of a better world, a better India. Such kind of themes were definitely there to encourage other writers, other Indian English poets, and this is all because of Nissim Ezekiel. There are different things which we can have with different poems also by Nissim Ezekiel. This poem, The Professor, is definitely one of the most wonderful poems of his career, where he remains very simple, he remains very common in language, and definitely the target itself is the language only, and through that he is focusing, he is trying to make us understand where exactly we stand. This is how we have just gone through the things, the poem, Nissim Ezekiel's The Professor. The entire poetry, the entire poem is very simple with the words and the conversational manner, but the basic, the intentional meaning, or we can say the hidden meaning of it, is something very serious kind, and that is what we have just gone through. Few things definitely you should think about, and you can understand through all these things. Thank you very much.
Sandhan. All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.